The cursor blinks on the login screen. White space. Cold and indifferent. I type the password I've used 1,000 times. The one that unlocks the shared world, the joint life we built digit by digit. Enter. Loading. The small circle spins. My breath holds. It's a mundane Tuesday afternoon. I just need to transfer funds for the house payment. Something I've done countless times, effortlessly, without a second thought. The screen changes. An error message. Generic. Access denied. My fingers pause above the keyboard. That's weird. Maybe a system glitch? I try again. Same result. Access denied. A faint tremor starts in my hand. I try the other joint account. The savings. The one meant for our future, for travel, for maybe starting a family someday. Same bank, different login. Enter. Loading. My heart starts a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. Access denied. The tremor spreads, shaking my entire arm now. My other arm reaches out, gripping the edge of the desk, hard. The polished wood feels slick under my suddenly clammy palm. Access denied. It's not a glitch. It's a lock. A digital deadbolt thrown without a word. My own name is on these accounts. Joint tenants. Equal access. Or so I thought. The silence in the office is suddenly deafening. Outside, traffic hums, distant sirens wail, the sounds of a world still turning, oblivious to the small, digital earthquake happening on my screen. Access denied. It echoes in my mind. Not just a technical error. An emotional statement. A door slammed in my face from inside my own home. By the one person I was supposed to trust. My husband. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It always helps me feel less alone knowing we're sharing this moment. And if you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before this cold, digital shockwave, life felt solid. Predictable. I had a good job, working my way up in a large, multinational tech company. He had his own business, a supplier for manufacturing plants. It was niche, specialized, and did reasonably well. We lived in a comfortable house, had friends, went through the familiar motions of marriage, shared meals, weekend plans, the quiet rhythm of two lives intertwined. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5. 7 years felt like a lifetime then. A bedrock built of shared jokes, mutual support, and the simple comfort of presence. I trusted him implicitly. He handled most of the household finances, the bill paying, the investments. It made sense. His business required a certain level of financial savvy, while my job was demanding in other ways. I saw the statements, of course, glanced at the balances. Everything seemed fine. Normal. He was charming when he wanted to be. Witty, confident, with a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He could also be distant, preoccupied. His business was his baby, demanding endless hours, late nights, constant travel. I understood. I had my own career ambitions. We were a modern couple, chasing success, supporting each other's drives. Or so I told myself. Looking back, there were signs. Small ones. He'd brush off questions about specifics, say it was handled. He'd get defensive if I suggested we automate payments or use a budgeting app together. He preferred keeping things manual, controlled. At the time, I saw it as a quirk, a preference for old-school methods. Not control. Not a prelude to this. My job was taking off. I'd been part of a major project, something high-profile within the company, and it had paid off. My salary had increased significantly. Bonus checks were becoming substantial. My contributions to the joint accounts were now matching, sometimes exceeding his. I was proud of my success. I thought he was too. He'd say things like, "You're doing great, honey." But there was often a subtle edge to it, a slight tension I couldn't place. He liked being the provider, the one who handled the important financial decisions. My rising income seemed to complicate that for him. We had plans. Big plans. Renovating the kitchen, a trip to Italy, maybe even starting to look at bigger houses, somewhere with a yard for future dog, future kids. These weren't just my dreams. We talked about them, sketched them out, earmarked funds in the very accounts I was now locked out of. These weren't small sums either. Our combined savings represented years of work, sacrifice, putting off smaller pleasures for bigger goals. A significant portion of it was my income, my bonuses, my financial future. The afternoon dissolved into a blur of frantic calls. First to the bank. Polite customer service reps, running checks, confirming the obvious. Yes, ma'am, the account access has been removed for your login. Was this done recently? Yes, within the last 24 hours. By whom? A pause. We can only confirm it was done by an authorized account holder, ma'am. Authorized account holder. The only other one was him. The confirmation felt like a physical blow. Then calls to him. Straight to voicemail. Again and again. His phone was off. That was unusual. He was always connected, always available for his business. Panic started to set in, cold and sharp. What was happening?
Why?
Was this some kind of sick joke? A mistake? But the methodical removal of access from both joint accounts felt deliberate. It felt like a severance. Without warning. Without explanation. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight, constricted. I needed to see him, needed him to explain, needed to understand. The house felt different when I got home.
Silent. Too silent.
His car wasn't in the driveway. The lights were off. It wasn't just empty. It felt stripped. Not of furniture, but of warmth, of presence. I walked through the rooms, calling his name. Mark? Are you here? Only my voice echoed back. I checked the garage. Empty. His suitcase was gone from the closet. Some of his clothes were missing. It hit me then, a wave of nausea. He hadn't just blocked my access to the money. He was gone. And he had taken our shared life, our financial foundation, with him. The initial confrontation was a disaster. When he finally called back, late that night, his voice was flat, devoid of the charm I knew.
Cold. Distant.
I was crying, pleading for an explanation. Mark, what is happening? Why did you block the accounts? Where are you? His answer was simple, brutal. I've left. I need space. And I've secured the funds. We'll talk through lawyers. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He spoke as if securing the funds was a practical necessity, like changing the oil in a car. Not like gutting our life savings, leaving me high and dry with a mortgage payment due, and no access to our money. I tried to argue, to reason. Secure the funds? Mark, that's our money. A huge part of that is my money. You can't just take it. His tone hardened. It's in my name now. And legally, it's complicated. We'll sort it out. Complicated.
He made it complicated.
He created the complication.
He had been planning this.
Removing my access first, then leaving. A calculated move. He knew I handled things like grocery money, casual spending, small bills from my individual account, but relied on the joint accounts for major expenses, for savings, for the financial security of our future. He knew cutting that off would cripple me, at least temporarily. The early struggles were humiliating and terrifying. I had my individual checking account, but it was never meant to hold the bulk of our combined wealth. It covered my personal expenses, sure, but the mortgage? The insurance? The significant chunk we'd just transferred for a planned home renovation? All locked behind his digital wall. I had to borrow money from friends just to cover immediate bills. Friends asked questions, saw the panic in my eyes, the forced cheerfulness I tried to project. Telling them felt like admitting failure, airing dirty laundry. I didn't even understand myself. I contacted a lawyer. Divorce lawyer. The words felt foreign on my tongue. The consultation was grim. Joint accounts aren't always straightforward, especially when one party has taken unilateral action. It would be a fight. An expensive fight. Freezing assets takes time. Legal maneuvering. He had the upper hand, at least financially. He had the cash, the resources he'd just stolen, to pay his legal fees, while I was scrambling to cover mine and keep a roof over my head. He started using the money as leverage. Not directly, but through his lawyer. Offers came in, ridiculously low settlement proposals that amounted to a fraction of what was rightfully mine. The implication was clear. Take what I'm offering, or I'll drag this out, bleed you dry with legal fees, while I sit on the cash. It was psychological warfare, using the very foundation of our shared life, the money we'd earned together, as a weapon against me. Every day was a battle against panic. Checking my individual account balance, calculating how long I could last. Cutting expenses to the bone. Microwaved meals, canceled subscriptions, saying no to social invitations because I couldn't afford to split a check. The contrast between my outwardly successful professional life and my precarious personal situation was jarring. At work, I was confident, capable, closing deals. At home, I felt like a pauper, stripped of security by the person who vowed to protect me. The indignity was almost worse than the fear. He was out there, living off our money, while I was rationing toothpaste. He'd built his business, in part, with my support, my patience during the long hours, my contribution to our shared expenses, while he reinvested profits. And this was his repayment, blocking me, leaving me adrift. The rising challenges weren't just financial. They were emotional, psychological. He played games. Sent cryptic emails through his lawyer, delaying responses, canceling mediation sessions at the last minute. He wanted to prolong the agony. He wanted me to feel helpless. And for a while it worked. The stress was immense. Sleep became a luxury. My focus at work suffered. I was functioning but barely. A hollow shell going through the motions. His business seemed to be doing well, despite the chaos he'd unleashed in his personal life. I saw glimpses of it online, local news mentions. It fueled a bitter resentment. He was prospering, using the very resources he denied me, while I was fighting for survival. The injustice of it burned hotter than the panic now. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about being seen, being valued, not being erased. The legal path felt slow, bureaucratic, and stacked against me. My lawyer was good, but realistic. Asset recovery takes time. Proving intent is hard. He had been clever, moving the money quickly, leveraging technicalities. It felt like walking through thick mud, every step a monumental effort, while he was sprinting ahead on solid ground. I was depleting my limited funds just to keep the legal fight alive. It felt like a losing battle. The darkness deepened. Doubt crept in. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was complicated. Maybe I didn't have a right to that money anymore, simply because he had moved it, declared it his. This was the lowest point. Sitting alone in the silent house, the weight of debt and despair pressing down, the future a terrifying blank space. Then came the midpoint shift. It wasn't a sudden revelation, more like a slow burn of icy clarity. I was talking to a colleague at work, venting vaguely about personal stress, the challenges of a difficult situation. They mentioned how interconnected the business world is, how seemingly unrelated companies can have massive leverage over each other through supply chains, partnerships, acquisitions. And something clicked. His business. His manufacturing supplier. It was the backbone of his operation. Without their specific components, his whole production line stopped. I knew the name of the company. He mentioned it constantly. It was a large, established player in their niche, but recently, I'd heard rumblings in my own industry about them. They were considered ripe for acquisition. An old guard company struggling to adapt. My company, the multinational tech giant, was always looking to diversify, to acquire strategic assets. An idea, cold and sharp, formed in my mind. It wasn't about the money anymore. Not directly. It was about power, leverage. He had used his financial power to try and control me, to strip me bare. But my power lay elsewhere. In my position within a company infinitely larger, more influential, more capable of impacting his world than he could ever impact mine. The shift wasn't just strategic, it was emotional. The despair didn't vanish, but it was overlaid with a new layer. Cold, determined focus. The fear of losing became a fierce resolve to win. Not just to survive, but to turn the tables completely. He thought he could cut me off, leave me powerless. He forgot I had my own world, my own resources, my own trajectory that he had conveniently ignored or underestimated. While he was busy playing games with our money, I was building something he couldn't touch, something he couldn't block with a password change. My company's M&A department was always looking for targets. I wasn't in that department directly, but I knew people. I started doing research. Quietly. After hours. Digging into his supplier, their financials, their market position, their vulnerabilities. They were indeed struggling. An attractive target for a larger player looking to enter their market or consolidate a supply chain. I began subtly feeding information, framing it purely in terms of corporate strategy. How acquiring this supplier could benefit our company. How it could streamline operations, cut costs, gain market share. I didn't mention my personal connection. Not a word about my husband. It was purely business. Cold, hard, logical business. I used the language of the boardroom, the metrics of corporate gain. It wasn't revenge I pitched, it was profit. The process was slow, painstaking. Mergers and acquisitions at this level take months, sometimes years. There were countless meetings, due diligence, negotiations. Every step forward for the potential acquisition felt like a small, secret victory in my personal war. Meanwhile, the legal battle over the joint accounts dragged on, a constant, draining reminder of his betrayal. He was still trying to wear me down, make me concede. He had no idea the wheels I had set in motion, wheels that would crush the very foundation of his business. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. It was about showing him that I was not someone to be discarded, someone whose contributions could be erased, someone who could be financially crippled and left for dead. It was about reclaiming my power, my worth, not just in my personal life, but in the world he thought he dominated. The deepening crisis phase coincided with the final, intense stages of the acquisition talks. My legal funds were almost gone. My lawyer was advising me to seriously consider a lower settlement, to cut my losses. The house was at risk. Every aspect of my life felt like it was crumbling under the relentless pressure he was exerting. He seemed confident, smug. He'd won the financial battle, or so he thought. He had the money, the leverage. He believed he had successfully cornered me. He'd even started subtly threatening my career, suggesting through his lawyer that he might publicly question my financial judgment or ethics if I didn't settle, implying it could damage my reputation. He was escalating, getting desperate as the legal fight dragged on longer than he probably anticipated, but still believing he held all the cards because he controlled the cash. He underestimated me, fundamentally. He saw me only as the woman he married, not as the professional I was, navigating complex corporate landscapes daily. The turning point came when I signed off on the final due diligence report related to the supplier acquisition. It was late. I was exhausted, staring at spreadsheets and legal documents that represented millions, potentially billions. And somewhere in that data, buried in a risk assessment, was the confirmation. This supplier was indeed critical to a handful of mid-sized manufacturing clients. Clients like my husband's company. Acquiring this supplier gave my company significant control over their supply chain. The leverage was immense. In that moment, staring at the cold, objective data, the weight of my personal crisis seemed to lift, replaced by a chilling sense of purpose. He had chosen the battlefield, finance and control, but he had brought a knife to a gunfight. His world, his business built on a fragile supply chain, was about to collide with the unstoppable force of corporate acquisition, a force I had quietly helped direct. The despair transformed into a steely, almost frightening resolve. I wasn't the victim cowering anymore. I was the architect of his downfall. The confrontation wasn't dramatic, not at first. It was a Monday morning. The news broke subtly, a press release issued before the market opened. Tech giant acquires manufacturing supplier. Business news outlets carried the story. Standard M&A reporting. Nothing in the headline screamed revenge. Nothing linked it to a messy divorce or stolen funds. It was just business. I was in the office, trying to project an air of calm professionalism, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew he'd see it. His business depended on that supplier. He'd get an official notification, a change in contact person, new terms of service perhaps from the new ownership. From my company. My phone rang mid-morning. His number. I hadn't spoken to him directly in months, only through lawyers. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. The desperation in the persistent ringing was palpable even through the screen. He was realizing. He was understanding the implications. Finally, I answered. My voice was calm, measured. Mark. Silence on the other end. Heavy, shocked silence. Then his voice, usually so confident, so smooth, was choked, disbelieving. What did you do? He wasn't talking about the divorce, the money. He was talking about the news. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold satisfaction spreading through me.
Do?
I went to work, Mark. Just like I always do. You knew. His voice rose, panic creeping in. You knew they were our supplier. You did this. I work for a large company, Mark, I said, keeping my tone even, professional. We make strategic acquisitions. This supplier was a valuable target. Valuable? You're going to gut them. You're going to change terms, restrict supply. You're going to ruin me. The plot twist landed. He thought he was safe, secure in his control of our money. He thought his business was separate, his untouchable domain. He didn't realize that by underestimating my professional life, by dismissing my career, he had opened a door to a kind of leverage he couldn't possibly comprehend or defend against. He had focused on the small game, the joint bank accounts, while I was playing chess on a corporate scale. My victory wasn't about getting my money back. It was about demonstrating that I could impact his world far more profoundly than he could ever impact mine. He had stolen my financial security. I had acquired his supply chain. That sounds like a business problem, Mark, I said, the dryness in my voice a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Perhaps you should have diversified your suppliers. Risky putting all your eggs in one basket, wouldn't you say? Especially when that basket is now owned by a company where your wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife, happens to be a key player. There was a gasp on the other end of the line. He was completely blindsided. He saw me as a victim, someone he could corner. He never saw me as a threat, as someone with the power to strike at the very heart of his livelihood. He had frozen my funds. I had frozen his business's future. The fallout was swift and, for me, laced with a grim, cold satisfaction. His business faced immediate uncertainty. New management at the acquired supplier meant new contracts, new terms, higher prices, potentially limited supply as things integrated. His company, so reliant on that single source, was suddenly vulnerable. Clients got nervous. Orders slowed. The empire he thought he'd protected by stealing from me began to crumble, not because I directly attacked it, but because I was part of the entity that had acquired its lifeline. Legally, the dynamic shifted completely. His lawyer's aggressive stance evaporated. The stolen money was no longer his impregnable fortress. It was a liability, a desperate act from someone whose primary income source was now unstable. My lawyer moved swiftly, using the change in his circumstances to push for a favorable settlement. The money he had tried to use as leverage was returned, with interest surprisingly quickly. He needed to free up capital, reassure investors, desperately try to find alternative suppliers in a market suddenly aware of his precarious position. He couldn't afford a protracted legal battle anymore. The house, my home, remained mine. The financial security he tried to steal was restored. But the victory felt hollow. Not triumphant in the way I might have imagined during the darkest days. Winning felt less like celebration and more like the quiet closing of a heavy door. I had fought. I had won. But the cost had been the destruction of a marriage, the shattering of trust, the loss of a shared future that, despite everything, had once held hope. He lost more than just financial leverage. He lost the respect of his peers, his clients, anyone who understood the precariousness of his situation. His confidence, once so absolute, was shattered. He underestimated me. He saw me as an extension of him, someone whose value was tied to my relationship with him, not as an independent force with my own capabilities and connections. He thought he was the only one who wielded real power. Rebuilding wasn't easy. The emotional scars remained. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken, almost impossible to fully repair. But the fear was gone. The financial insecurity was gone. I stood on my own feet, my career thriving, my finances secure, not because he allowed it, but because I had built that security myself and defended it using the very professional strengths he had ignored. The old saying is about karma, about what goes around comes around. But this wasn't passive. This was active. He made a move to destroy my financial life, and I countered with a move on his business life. It was cold, strategic, and utterly devastating for him. It wasn't just about getting back what was mine. It was about demonstrating that you cannot strip someone of their agency and expect them to quietly disappear. You cannot build your security on the foundation of another person's stolen future. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't direct confrontation, but leverage found in unexpected places. He thought my world revolved around him, around our shared home and finances. He didn't realize I had built a parallel world, a career, a network, a level of influence he couldn't even see, let alone control. The silence in my house now is just silence. Not the heavy, empty silence of his departure, but a quiet, peaceful silence. The silence of a life rebuilt, piece by piece. The wounds are still there, hidden beneath the surface, but they are healing. I learned that the truest security comes from within, from your own capabilities, your own resilience. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud and messy, but quiet, precise, and delivered through the cold, unfeeling hand of corporate strategy. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever faced a betrayal that shook your foundations, know that you have strength you don't even realize yet. And if you're still listening, still here with me through this story, thank you. Subscribing really does help bring more of these stories to life.